Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Zag Talk podcast. I'm here with Carson and Dylan, back here again with you, Brian Mary. And today we've got some really cool stuff to talk about, some big time new releases in terms of analytics. So Evan Miyakawa, he just released a whole bunch of information on his website for the upcoming season and finalized some information from last season as well. And one other interesting thing that we're going to chat about today is that Ken Pomeroy from the famous kenpom.com jumped on a podcast with Jordan Sperber of Hoop Vision. They both do amazing work, both on, I think Jordan spends a lot of time on video editing and things like that, as well as some things with regard to analytics. And Ken Pom is just like the analytics king in college basketball. So they chatted about a whole bunch of interesting stuff. So we'll talk about that a little bit today. And then finally, we've got our player previews with Ben Gregg and Drew Timme. So to kick things off, we'll talk about the podcast a little bit.
The main part of the podcast was pretty much just talking about how weird it is of a year following last season with, all the COVID pauses, limited games, some teams only playing in conference, the back-to-back type of scheduling that we had, and how that goes into, or how it affects the preseason rankings and ratings for analytical websites, specifically KenPom, this season. And there was just some interesting things that thought we could talk about, just because we touched on it a lot last week, and we always touch on it at the beginning of the season, and just how, the preseason predictions are going to have a lot of forecasting error, and, just some of the stuff that goes into that. So there's a few things that we'll touch on there, and also some good examples that are maybe a little bit outside of just straight up analytics, in terms of a conversation we were having last week about UCLA as well. So, and I think it ties into some of Evan Mia's predictions that we see that maybe are a little bit eye-popping, a couple of the teams that have been called out even on Twitter already. So, but I think a couple of the really interesting things that I took from it, one was just the home court advantage last year compared to normal years is quite a bit different, which makes sense, right? Because you're not going to have the fans, or as many fans. It actually did tick up a little bit, the home court advantage, towards the end of the season, which is likely because of fans being let back in most places. But also the thing that they highlighted with that is that it's a lot of times actually the reffing. If you look at the foul rate for the home team, and the difference between the home and the away team, that home games, there's normally a bigger discrepancy in favor of the home team. So, they're getting more foul calls for them and less against them. Again, that probably comes back to the crowd. But that was something last year that was about a full point lower than normal. Obviously go give that podcast a listen, but it was funny listening to Ken and Jordan talking about it. And they're just like, yeah, in the grand scheme of things, 1 point, like, not going to make a huge difference. But just when you start stacking all those things together, when you're starting to use the different variables for the preseason ratings, it can get weird. Same thing with, playing the conference schedules that a lot of people played, the COVID pauses where teams for the first 2 games, I think they showed that there were significant differences in their play when they came back the first 2 games. But then by the 3rd or 4th game, that effect was gone. I don't know, Brian, what else was I missing there that were just some interesting differences?
I thought the most interesting part of the podcast, and I think the reason why I think this is most interesting is because we have one of these scenarios this year that could be pretty impactful to our record. And that is games played back to back, like in back-to-back days with no rest. And what Ken said was that it didn't impact any of the probabilities whatsoever, meaning based on his probabilities, everything came out exactly as you would expect. However, on the day of the second game, a few things were kind of true for those games as opposed to the first games. The first one is that the games are generally played a little bit slower, and they also have more free throw attempts going both ways, right? yeah, I mean, what I think is interesting about that is just, when teams are a little bit more tired, and maybe don't have as fresh of legs, they let up a little bit on their efficiency of the way they play defense. Back to the implication for us, we have one back-to-back scenario this year in our schedule, and that is when we play Central Michigan on November 22nd and then UCLA on November 23rd. And so the pace of play for that UCLA game is going to be, I think, really important because according to Ken Palm, we are the 12th fastest team in college basketball this year, and UCLA is the 12th slowest. So it'll really be interesting to see how that impacts the pace of play. One other thing to consider, we play Central Michigan the day before. UCLA plays Bellarmine, which is it's their second year in college basketball this year, although they're ranked 120 spots better than Central Michigan. So anyway, really interesting stuff. I'm really curious to see how that all plays out. And just one more thing to think about going into those games. The Central Michigan game and the Bellarmine game may not be tough games for either team, but playing that those back-to-back games could have an impact on the pace of play and the amount of free throws everyone shoots. So I don't know, kind of interesting.
What is this is a question about you. What's UCLA's depth look like this year?
Better than last year.
But sure. I'm sure it's better than I hope it's better than last year. But do they have Gonzaga has a lot of depth, although losing Dom obviously hurts. What kind of factor do you think that will play in that we'll call it a series, right? Of like both teams are going to have a game the day before. Gonzaga can probably lean a little bit more on their bench than UCLA might be able to in their game against Bellarmine, especially with us playing, like you said, a team ranked 100 spots lower than the team that UCLA is playing. Ben Gregg and our backup guards and are probably going to get a lot more run in that game against Central Michigan. So hopefully we can keep our starters' legs a little bit fresher for that UCLA game.
Yeah, so, first, I want to clarify. I'm looking at Ken Palm right now. It actually looks like Central Michigan is significantly worse than Bellarmine, or is expected to be. So,
yeah. Yep.
Okay, sorry. I heard that backwards.
Yeah, I think I might have said it backwards.
So, yeah, at UCLA, in terms of depth, they'll have Peyton Watson, I would assume, is coming off the bench. That's like a sure thing. You're going to have Miles Johnson, the guy from Rutgers. And then they have one other guy that came back who I thought was going to be on the bench, but that might be wrong. I thought they had a third solid option off the bench. If anybody knows UCLA roster better than me.
Did we mention Bernard started last year.
But he's still there, right?
Yes. I think they bring everybody back.
Except they didn't have for the guy who was hurt.
Chris Smith. Yeah.
And Chris Smith and Jalen Hill are the only two non-returners from last year's team.
So I mean, they'll be able to go 8 deep. Maybe they have a 9th guy who can step up. So yeah, I mean it'll be interesting. I mean, I think both teams will be able to handle who they're playing the day before the big game fairly well. But yeah, I guess, if you can get your guys out 5 minutes earlier, that might help a little bit. I also don't know, tip time. Do we know who's earlier between those two games?
So we are 8 p.m. against Central Michigan, and they're the game before us.
So I don't like that very much.
Yeah, we're 8 p.m. against Central Michigan, and then 7 p.m. the next day against UCLA.
Yeah. Well, yeah. So I mean, at least we play late the next day, but yeah, a couple hours in that situation could be useful. But I mean, it's early in the season, so I don't think fatigue is going to be as big of a thing. But in terms of UCLA, maybe while we're on the topic, another thing that was brought up in the Solving Basketball Jordan Sperber podcast was just how big of a difference when we look at forecasting and preseason rankings this year. And we talked about last week with UCLA how suddenly they're number 2 in the country after being an 11 seed last year, almost losing in the first 4, and just how different that is, like how the range of outcomes for them seems like it could be pretty wide because you don't know what you're going to get. And they touched on this where UCLA going into the tournament was 44th in Ken Palm's rankings. And Michigan State was an offensive rebound away from sealing that game. Didn't get it. UCLA ended up winning the game. And so they're one offensive rebound away from finishing the season with the first 4 loss as an 11 seed, 44th in the country. Dylan, you brought up right before this, maybe they don't get Miles Johnson if they don't make a Final Four run. Could look different. Juzang might be gone. Well, I mean, he's probably still there because he doesn't have the tournament, but, probably looks different, the hype around them. And they ended up finishing the end of last year after their run as number 12, I think, in Ken Palm's ranking. So just the difference that a couple games can make, especially end of the season, and kind of goes into that whole thing with UCLA this year, and you don't know where to put them because, we're talking about an offensive rebound that changed them from an afterthought this year to the number 2 team and the rankings number 7 in Ken Palm. So it's really weird just at that point. I mean, maybe Michigan State ends up being a big team this year if that goes differently. But
and beyond that, we didn't even have the tournament in 2020. So and UCLA was doing the exact same thing as they kind of talk about. They were on a tear, right? They were ready to be a team that could potentially have made the tournament if they won the Pac-12 tournament championship in March. So who knows? Maybe our expectations for UCLA would have been different going into 2021, even if we have a full tournament in 2020. So really interesting thoughts, and I'm curious to see as the season gets going what these predictive models end up turning out, how accurate they end up being.
Yeah, and I would expect, and I think they're telling everybody. I know Haslam's been telling everybody with his, like, hey, these are terrible. Don't pay attention to them. Like, they mean nothing. There's just so many variables that have to go into it. And sure, I mean, it's a lot easier with the main teams that you know a lot about, the ones who don't have a lot of transfers or a lot of freshmen. And I mean, they talk about last year, like, yeah, sure, you could have said, oh, I feel like Duke and Kentucky are going to be terrible, but nobody was saying that. But you know that there's probably a wider range of outcomes with those two teams bringing in a lot of freshmen and a lot of new guys. So you could say the same about Texas this year and Kentucky, where they're bringing in a ton of new pieces, including a new coach in Texas's case. So stuff to look out for, and, don't get pissed off when you see these things online and say the nerds are, out to get us again or whatever. There's always going to be prediction error, but they're trying to do this. It's just part of the process. And, Ken Palm, I think, has very clearly been a good thing for college basketball and has been really great for even people watching the game to understand it better. So looking forward to that. I guess with Evan Mia's rankings coming out today, both the team and player rankings, if you haven't listened to our episode with him last year, we had an interview, a pretty lengthy interview with him. Go check that out. I tweeted out a link to it earlier on Twitter today. His is a little different than what you'll see in Ken Palm, mainly because his centers around player ratings, and then that goes into the team ratings. Some highlights from it, though. Gonzaga had 4 guys in the top 30. Those were Drew Timme, who was number 3. Chet was at number 18. Actually, Nemhard was number 7. Sorry. Chet at number 18. And then Anton Watson at number 27, which probably is a bit of a surprise to some people. But if you followed Evan's ratings last year, you would have known that Anton Watson through February, pretty much up until he lost his starting role, was actually in the top 25, mainly because of his defense, but he's also playing with a lot of really good guys on the court. So when he was on the court, the team was doing well. That's going to kind of carry his rankings, but he finished at 82. So do I think he's the 27th best player in college basketball? No, absolutely not. But that's not what Evan's ratings are. So go give the episode a listen. You'll probably understand his ratings a little bit better, and what he's looking at, what they're predicting, what they're forecasting. But maybe one thing for you two that I noticed to get your thoughts on, So outside of our 4 guys in the top 30, our next closest was in the 200s. I think it was Hunter Salas, and then Strother was actually at like 280 something. So those ones are big, tough to forecast. No playing time for Salas, very little playing time for Strother. But what were your guys' takeaways from the player ratings for Gonzaga players specifically?
I was particularly interested in the fact that Andrew Nemhard is top 10 in those rankings. And as we've talked about, Evan goes off the Bayesian performance rating, which I believe it's basically predictive, right? Predictive based off existing data. And so, as whether or not it's a feature or a bug, if a player doesn't have any data at all to go off of in college basketball, they will not be kind of ranked. And therefore, Chet is not in the top 10. Neither is Paolo Banchero. And, neither are any freshmen. So, I think that over time, what we'll see is the teams that are the most efficient will end up with the most players in the top tier of Evan's ratings. In terms of expectations for our guys, like I would expect Julian Strother to move very quickly into like the top 100 or top 50. I think that because we do have a little bit of data on him and the fact that he didn't play in very tough scenarios and didn't put up huge numbers, I think that's probably why he's a lot lower than Hunter Salas. And so, I think as the season progresses, like all these predictive models, what we'll come to understand is just we'll just get a better sense of like the general picture of it all, right? Like,
one thing we talked about with Evan when we had him on was that he will stop, his model has kind of an analytically final score, just like Haslametrics does. Ken Palm, it's known that he does not have that in his model. But so the way Gonzaga was last year, where we were blowing out a lot of teams, even some of the good teams we played, that even means that those 7 minutes a game that Julian Strother was getting were probably not even being included in the model. Like he probably has 15, 20 minutes total of time that's been used and kept in the model. And when he was in there, it was normally with a almost fully second squad for Gonzaga. So that's kind of the thing you got to know when you're looking at some of these statistical models. We love them. We love these websites and love using them, but you have to take it with a grain of salt early in the year. And like you were saying, Brian, the Bayesian statistics, the whole thing is about creating statistical predictions and updating those incrementally every single time that you have new information and new data come in. So like you said, right now we have no data for this season to use. So as we start getting more games start getting played, we're going to have a lot better of idea and a lot more accurate statistics. Like what you said with the freshman, he had tweeted out today that he almost never will have a freshman in the top 10 of his rankings because there's been such a boom or bust kind of nature around star freshmen that it's really hard for the model to push them up into the top 10. He even noted, he was like, I want them to be higher. Like, I think that both Paulo and Chet are going to be top 10 guys, top 15 guys, but it just won't, the model won't let him do that because there's been so much up and down between those types of players that it just doesn't work. And we're playing probabilities here, so it's not an eye test thing.
And just to be clear, I know, B. Mary, I know you said like, oh, they're not in the top 10. Speaking of Paolo and Chet. That being said, with all of the stuff that these guys just said about, it not being the most reliable and guys not making the top 10, Chet Holmgren is still ranked 18th. Like he's still a top 20 guy, even with all of that being said. Paolo is still a top 30. He's at 29. Like there is something to be said about making all those notes and those guys still being top 30 guys. Like they are going to be so goddamn dominant. Once we get into actually playing games and we have some statistics to put behind the preseason rankings, it's gonna be wild. And I'm excited to see Chet and Paolo move up the list at least somewhat throughout the season.
Yeah, you bring up a few outlier cases. There are a few weird outliers on the team side as well, like the team rating side. First of all, Belmont, number 11. Again, a lot of this has to do with the fact that, we have a ton of data from last year, and Belmont brings back 97% of their minutes from last year. I don't think they had a single guy who got significant minutes that ended up leaving or graduating or anything. They were actually expected to win the Ohio Valley Conference. They didn't, so they didn't make the tournament. They were almost an at-large bid, and for a mid-major conference like that to have been a 2-bid league, I mean, that would have been huge for them. Another outlier, which I think is really interesting, is that Texas is all the way down at 27, and I think that part of it, even though they're bringing in a ton of transfers, I think if you ask Evan, he probably would say, this is another case of just not having enough data. Additionally, I'm not sure that Evan's data takes into account, or Evan's model takes into account, coaching changes, because Texas's defense, I think they're going to be better than the number 28 defense in the country. I think Chris Beard, historically has had his teams in better form on the defensive end than your average team, and that's, I think, evident by Texas Tech. They're ranked number 13. Their defensive rank is number 11 in the nation. So again, this is going off historical data. I would expect Texas to jump up a whole bunch, and even Evan himself, just in chatting with him a little bit back and forth once these ratings came out, he even said, is Belmont a top 10 team? Like, probably not. Top 25 though, like maybe we could see them creep up in there. So, as we said,
if we're going to talk about Belmont, like Drew Timme is number 3 on the list of players. If we go back to the player list, Drew Timme's number 3. Number 2 is Grayson Murphy from Belmont. So it's that highlights again the outliers that get driven by dominant teams that have the ability to dominate other teams without pushing it past the point of statistically final game or whatever. So I think that's something to be said. Like Belmont, those guys can be really efficient, can be really good, but they're also probably not blowing teams in their conference out. I guess I'm saying that without looking at Belmont's schedule, but I would think that they might have some more competitive games than Gonzaga might in conference. Although we still play people. I'm not saying we don't play anybody. I'm just saying some of our conference games are not competitive.
Yeah, so Belmont finished 26-4 last year. I think I remember them kind of flirting with the top 25. Kind of seemed like a team that should have made it into the tournament. But again, they finished the regular season with 2 losses and then lost in their conference tournament final. Or maybe it was the semifinal. I can't see on here. But like you said, in conference, it was kind of a mixed bag. They had a few really close games, 1 to 5 point games, and then they had other ones where they're blowing out SIU Edwardsville 114-62. So, but one thing that's interesting, you said Drew Timme's 3rd. He was number 2 at the end of last season. The Belmont guy was number 8. So again, there's going to be different things that factor into that. And we have to remember this is statistical modeling. You cannot have accurate statistical models with no data, or there's going to be a very, very, very large forecasting error. That's just basic statistics. So college basketball season in and of itself isn't even a big enough sample size to have these be really accurate. We saw that between Gonzaga and Baylor. If the statistical models were perfect, Gonzaga would have not blown out, but we would have beaten Baylor by 6, 7, 8 points. There's going to be a margin for error somewhere on the bell curve where there's an outlier event where Baylor beats us by 16 points and it's not really that close. Like there's always going to be things like that. Just like in the preseason ratings, there's going to be ones that look really far off. I was telling you guys before this, I was like, you can go to any statistical website, look at their preseason rankings and pick out at least one that is very obviously not very accurate or that won't be that way. We said this one where you have Belmont at number 11. Ken Palm has San Francisco at number 34. San Francisco is not the 34th best team in the country. They're going to be good this year. They're going to be a lot better than they have been. Probably going to be more in the 60 to 80s range, if I had to guess. But they have the benefit of bringing back a lot of guys. They have a coach and a program that literally bases all of their decision-making off of statistical analysis, so they're going to be better suited for situations like this because they play to that style that's going to be attractive to a model like that. So just hold on to your panties. It's eventually going to solve itself out a little bit.
Hold on to your panties. Episode title. One last note I want to make on Evan Mia's site from my end. It's not anything statistically relevant in the top 10 or anything like that, but rounding out the top 50 at the exact 50 spot is BYU, and rounding out the top 25 for a player perspective is Alex Barcello. So BYU's got a little bit of representation there in the Evan Mia rankings. Barcello, a top 25 guy. I could honestly see him finishing a top 25 guy. I do wonder if Evan Mia's account or Evan Mia's statistics take into account the fact that Alex Barcello hit 6 threes in a row during a shooting drill at practice last week. I don't know if anybody saw that one on Twitter, but evidently some BYU quote unquote sports reporter thought that was of note, that hitting 6 threes in practice in a row was a big deal. I have yet to send him the 70 of 75 that Kyle Wilcher hit, but yeah, interesting notes there.
Tell me you've never been to a basketball practice without telling me you've never been to a basketball practice before. I cringed when I saw that. It was.
I think I saw him in conversation, like in the comments with somebody who was kind of like, "Oh, like no, I've been to practices, grew up around basketball, but it was like the first time in 2 years that I've been in there, and I just got a little excited." And I was like, "That's fine. It's cool to watch good guys play basketball, but like that's when you realize, oh, I probably overreacted here. Maybe I should delete this tweet before I lose all future credibility, because that's just
yeah."
Are you kidding me? Skip Bayless still has a Twitter account. The kid will be fine.
he'll be fine.
ESPN's already calling.
Oh boy. We got 2 players left in our player preview series. Who do we have?
We have Ben Gregg and Drew Timme.
Love it.
Who do we want to start with? Should we start with Greg?
Let's start with the vanilla gorilla. Let's do it.
Actually, I have a second question for him that I'll start off with. Will he be able to recover from a PR perspective from his Instagram hack of last week?
That was maybe one of the funniest. And, I don't know if announcing to the world that he got hacked so that everyone flocked to his Instagram was maybe the smartest thing to do. But
it was so outlandish. If you didn't get a chance to see it, if it's still up, I would assume it's not. I haven't looked today. I have screenshots. But if it's still up, it ranged from a 40-year-old gamer to a
40 is generous.
40 is generous.
He looked like the most interesting man in the world from the Dos Equis commercials.
Yeah, so ranging from that to a European bikini model, it was obviously not like I got hacked as a cover for something getting posted. Like the dude definitely got hacked. But announcing it to the world, probably not the best idea.
I also didn't realize that Ben Gregg might be, I don't know if Chet is, but he might be like the only guy on our team. He's verified on Instagram, I think I saw, unless that was also part of the hack. But he had a blue check mark when I searched it, which was why when I looked it up, I looked up Vanilla Gorilla because I thought I'd seen that somewhere on like the Gonzaga Instagram. And I was like, how was Ben Gregg verified on Instagram? But again, that could very easily have been from the hack.
Is that the most
It is
polite
not.
hack? Is that the most polite hack ever? Like jump in there and then apply for verification while you're while
Chet,
you have access to their account. That's pretty funny.
so Chet and him are both verified. Just to clarify, not just him. He does have his account back. He only has 5 posts now, but he does have his account back, and he is still verified. So it is, as somebody who tried to verify the Drew Timmy Stash account, because like, what are you gonna do? Not verify a parody account? I don't know. I felt like I went for it. I got denied. But as somebody who's tried, it really is just like you just have to submit like 2 pieces of like noteworthy news about yourself. So it's not the hardest process in the world.
Oh yeah, I just looked, and like every single person on the team that I've looked up on Instagram is verified. So apparently they're handing that stuff out a little more easily on Instagram than they are on Twitter.
Yeah, the Twitter blue check mark is definitely the harder one of the 2.
All right, I'm gonna pull us back on some more basketball related topics. Ben Gregg's question for him is: did the extra half year / early start pay off in significant early development? And will he be at a point where he's ready and able to step into consistent minutes in big games this year?
I'll start us off. I think, was there a significant impact? I don't know if it's going to end up coming out that those 6 months gave him this huge advantage over guys that started in the summer. But especially because especially because of coaching changes, like so much is going to change from a coaching perspective. I mean, obviously Few still at the helm, minus 3 games. There's some things that are going to stay the same, but a lot is also going to change with Tommy Lloyd going out the door, and Gentry coming in the door. So I don't know that it significantly helps him, but yeah, I mean, having a college trainer and college gym and a gym like Gonzaga's in the Volcor Athletic Center, having that 6 months early, yeah, absolutely. That creates an advantage for him over other guys in his class. Do I think that it significantly prepared him to contribute to the team this year? No, I think he probably would have come in at the same level that I think we may see him at the beginning of this year. I just think the ramp up could be faster than it was last year, or than it would have been had he not started last year.
Yeah, I also think that actually being in the locker room, being around a bunch of Division I athletes and experiencing an NCAA tournament, as weird as it was because of COVID and everything, you really can't put a price on that. Now, that alone, to your point, Dylan, isn't going to make someone, a top tier player or athlete or whatever. I think that what you do get out of it, though, is a certain sense of what it means to be a Zag and a part of a winning mentality, a winning team. And there's just a difference, right? I know that did all 3 of us experience varsity basketball in high school? We're a part of varsity teams.
I did.
2 out of 3 of us. But yeah.
Sorry, Dylan. Sorry. I wasn't sure.
Technically, I swung between the 2, but I never played a minute of varsity. So yeah, no, not really.
Okay. Sorry. I didn't
it's
know.
Okay.
I didn't know.
It's fine.
But
it's fine.
There's a difference. It makes a difference being there, right? Like Carson, I know you played 4 years on varsity, or at least swung your freshman year, right?
Yeah.
How big of a difference for you did it make just being in the locker room, being around those top tier guys, being, at such a young age? Did that prepare you well for your following seasons, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, and especially obviously JV to varsity is, in terms of seriousness, is a little bit different, but like even from a high school level to a college level, that's going to be a huge jump just in knowing what is expected of guys on the team, and how even as much like things such as game day, how you're preparing at a college level, or, with more of a pro mindset, and that whole preparation to play is so much different. Like our practices for JV are going to be a lot less prep. Like you're going to have way less scouting. And I think that jump from high school to college is going to be a big difference too. Like, sure, you're going to have a certain amount of scouting. Normally, most well-run high school programs are going to have in-depth video, some sort of platform like Huddle or something, so where you're watching film on who you're playing, you're preparing for that in practice, going over their sets, you have the scout team. But college, that's going to be a whole new level and a whole extra amount of preparation, and the way that you're preparing yourself the week of the game, the day before the game, the day of the game. So I think that'll be really helpful for him, kind of to Dylan's point in terms of speeding up that process of getting ready to play.
And I'm
I think
crossing
about.
my fingers.
Ooh, sorry, I was just going to say, I think about the alternative. I mean, for him especially, Oregon didn't play high school basketball last year. So what would he have been doing, right? Maybe individual skill work all year. We saw how that worked out for guys like Marshawn Beauchamp and things like that. So I think it was the best possible scenario for him.
Another thing there too, you talk about part of being up at that level is you see the types of guys and the types of talent you're going to be playing at that next level. I think of my freshman year when I was then on varsity by the time the end of the season came around. We played Gary Bell in the district tournament, and seeing that level of play, that was kind of your first experience. Sure, I'd played guys my own age that, have gone on to play Division I basketball, NBA basketball, but like seeing somebody who's in their senior year of high school about to go to the D1 level and playing at that level, it kind of opens your eyes a little bit, especially if you're getting into the game. Like Ben Gregg got to get into a few games. I'm not sure if he got in the tournament for very many minutes, but end of the season, whatever, like getting used to that and seeing that live in person is a pretty big piece, I think, for your development.
I mean, he played, 5 minutes against Norfolk opening round, a minute against Creighton, a minute against UCUSC, a minute against Baylor. But the 14 games he got in before that, he was averaging 2.5 minutes a game. So it's not like, and again, conference play, but it's not like he didn't play. It's not like he didn't touch the floor, right? Like he actually got in and scored points in games and got rebounds. Like he got not significant playing time, but he got significant impact from being on the team. And what I was going to say, but before I interrupted Brian, was the amount, or the success story that will come out of him coming a year early if he does really turn it on and develop this year and get up to speed really quickly. Like that's a pitching point in the future. Not that it's something that's going to be utilized all the time, but when you have the ability to be like, look what happened when we did that. I mean, look at what we did with recruiting guys that were at mid-level D1 programs, we're at mid-pack teams in top divisions, looking at Nigel Williams-Goss, looking at guys like that, being able to bring them in and have them develop over a year. This is us bring them in and have them develop over 6 months and get the ability to start off playing against non-conference teams. Because also think about like, if his first minutes come against Duke at the beginning of the year or UNC at the beginning of the year in non-conference versus his first time he steps on the court, it's against Dixie State, like pretty good test for him. I think the other piece being he will specifically that idea of pitching early could become relevant for Anthony Black, depending on how the rest of his season goes, or I guess I should say the lack of season that he's going to be able to have this year. As unfortunate as it is, maybe that's an opportunity for us to pitch something like that to him.
Yeah, and I think the biggest thing for Greg, maybe less, I mean, obviously we just talked about being there for the season, seeing that, going to a national championship game, having Corey Kispert in the locker room, Joel Ayayi in the locker room, like those guys, that's all a huge thing, like a huge piece to be around in terms of the culture and the leadership. But there's a limit to how much you're going to get when you're playing 2-3 minutes a game. But just from the practices we saw, he looked a lot more comfortable towards the end of the season when he was coming into games than he did at the beginning of when he first started coming in. But I think those couple months after the season, when he's still on campus and he doesn't have to wait until when the rest of the freshmen come in, are going to be like, I don't think that's going to be a big difference that we see that developmental time there. And I think that's why at the beginning of the year, you're going to see him looking more ready and comfortable at the college level than someone like Caden Perry, who's a similar level player, but is coming in new and is going to have to adapt to all that new stuff early on.
So it's a long way of us all agreeing that yes, he will be ready. All right, let's switch gears. Drew Timme. I think there's no doubt that he's potentially going to be the most important player for us this year. And I mean, we're bringing back our leading scorer for, consensus National Player of the Year, right? So we've got a few questions that are a little bit more nuanced to start off, right? How much has he expanded his game away from the rim, and will we see that in games this year?
Yeah, I think it was, as the clips we've seen coming out of practice and whatnot, it looks like he's been working on a shot. It's not like he didn't have a shot last year. We just didn't work it to him in that position as much. That being said, I think we're going to be in a similar position this year with the ability to stretch Chet outside and have him be our shooting big man. He's going to have to play inside more. Like, he's going to be a true center. It's interesting that obviously that he's up for the same award that he won last year, but I do think he'll be asked to play more inside and be the rebounding presence on top of obviously Slender Man. But I think he's going to be asked to play more inside. And I think we're just going to see him continue to his post dominance. We're not going to ask him to step outside and shoot like we might ask Watson to do. We've talked about that with his. We're not going to have to ask him to do what Chet's doing. So I don't know if we'll see it as much as he might be working on it.
Yeah, I mean, I think we saw it a couple times last year. I mean, he shot threes last year, but he liked to attack instead. I just think when he gets it in those situations, because there are going to be times when he gets the ball at the top of the key or, a little bit above the free throw line, where instead of going to attack, which he does really well, he's going to also be able to knock it down. And that's just going to open up the inside and his driving game even more, which we already know he's great. And that's honestly probably an underrated aspect of his game for outsiders is his driving ability from the top of the key. But if he's able to knock that down more consistently, or if a bunch of people are crashing down on Chet or on a driver, like on Nembhard driving down, I think that just opens up his game more. From what we've heard, he has improved it a little bit. It's been up and down, as you might expect with, big guys getting used to that distance, but we've seen videos of him from the offseason working on it. I think another part of that also is defensively away from the rim, working on that lateral foot speed and being able to stay in front is going to be a big thing. And I think, honestly, that's probably the bigger question on if he can get to that level. I think offensively, that's probably less of a worry for our team and for maybe NBA scouts. Obviously, they want to be able to see him flash that. But I think he's shown the touch and the ball skills to be able to do that. I think now it's more from a foot speed, lateral quickness perspective that's going to be the big thing for him.
Yeah, I tend to agree with Dylan in that Drew Timme will have the ability to play offensively out on the perimeter. We won't see him shoot a bunch of threes this year necessarily, but he'll have that as a little bit of, part of his game. I think it'll probably be very similar to a Domantas Sabonis scenario where in year one, he shot a three once every 10 games. and then in year two, that jumped up to like once every other game. And so, yeah, it won't be a huge part of his game, but hopefully he'll be able to stretch the defense out a little bit more than he was able to last year. I completely agree with you too, Carson. Defensively will probably be the biggest question mark because ultimately if he can't defend on the perimeter, that raises all kinds of questions about if he'll be able to be successful in the NBA, because everyone knows his big strength is the ability to score inside. And, but at the same time, he's not 7'1", that inside, pivot a whole bunch of times and make a lay-in or whatever. Like that is not as much a part of the NBA game anymore. So I think that the big question mark will be, will he be able to play defense on the perimeter? And as we've talked about in the national championship game last year, that got exposed a little bit, and he wasn't able to handle it anytime he had a guard attacking him. So yeah, will he be able to? I think that we all need to, again, curb our expectations just a little bit. I don't know if he's going to improve by leaps and bounds defensively on the perimeter, but I do think that he will improve somewhat, and that should help us.
Yeah, and like you were saying, in terms of taking 3-pointers, so I'm looking at his stats here. His freshman year, he averaged 0.1 3-point attempts per game. So he didn't shoot anything, but he obviously took a few attempts, shot 33%. Last year, he averaged 0.7 per game, so just under 1. He made 28.6%. Other shooting trends, obviously we know he has the high percentage inside, but from the free throw line, he was 61% his freshman year, and he was 70% last year with 5.8 attempts per game from the free throw line. That'd even be a great start. Just if he can hit 75 plus 80% of his free throws, get comfortable with that stroke, that'd be great. I know free throws aren't always super highly correlated with overall shooting. But yeah, from the 3-point line, if he's taking 1 to 1.5 per game and making 35, 40%, I mean, 40% is pretty high, but like if you're not shooting them in volume, if he's getting a wide open look every once in a while in a game where he just gets forgotten about, it gets dumped back to him, somebody's not respecting him, there's a lapse there, and he can knock it down. He hits a 3 every other game. Like, that's perfect. Makes the teams respect him. That if he's going to get an open one, he's going to knock it down more than likely, or more likely than not. So, yeah, I mean, I don't think anybody's expecting him to come out here and look like Chet, where he's just like a great shooter, but that ability to knock it down more consistently, you could tell there were times last year where he was not comfortable with that. He would shoot it every once in a while, but every time it went up, you were like, probably not going in. Don't hate the shot because they're giving it to him. But 28.6%, not great.
Right.
So, yeah.
Right. Yep. I would honestly trade, 80% on his free throws for, maintaining that 28% on 3 versus keeping his free throw percentage from last year and shooting 35% from 3. Like,
yeah,
I would
I mean, the overall effect is going to be greater. I was curious. I haven't looked at it, but maybe I will for a future episode, or if I have time here, looking at how many. I feel like he was getting more attempts from 3 in the tournament or later part of the season because teams started to leave that open for him a little bit more. And that's the one thing that I would be worried about if he really just like stayed away from it, that teams would start playing him that way, and that takes away his driving. And then that's where I would get concerned because, yeah, I don't want him shooting that shot a ton at a low percentage, and that takes away part of the game. So I'll look into that another time. Maybe I'll throw it in a tweet or something as we start seeing out this season and how teams play him this season.
Yeah, no, you're right. He did start shooting more consistently toward the back half of the year. In the last 10 games of the season, he shot 7 threes, but he didn't make a single one. But what that means is, first half of the year, let's see what he shot from 3. First half of the year, he shot 0.7 attempts per game, and he shot 43%. What the heck? That's crazy. I think we'll probably see an attempt per game on average this coming season, which is
probably
fine.
no more than 3 in any given game. His most last year was 2. He had a few games of that. But yeah, I mean, I don't think he's going to be a volume outside shooter, nor do I think he needs to be, or our offense needs him to do that. I just want that ability to show that he's willing to shoot if it happens.
Mm-hmm.
All right, last question for Drew Timmy. We'll make this a quick one. We originally were going to ask, this was before all of the preseason polls came out, will he be a National Player of the Year? I think that's a resounding yes for all of us. But on top of that question, can he break, or can he and the Zags break the trend of no championship for the National Player of the Year? So If you didn't know, the last National Player of the Year to win a championship was Jalen Brunson in 2018. Doesn't seem that long ago, but the only national players in the last 20 years that have went on to win a title in that same year have been 2018 Jalen Brunson and Anthony Davis with Kentucky in 2010, I believe. I looked all the way back to the UCLA years, and I sent this in a text to our group message. I don't remember the exact number, but it's like six players ever going back to 70 something have won a national championship in the same year that they've had a National Player of the Year. So pretty unlikely. But it does happen when you have really good teams like the 2018 Villanova team and a really good player like Jalen Brunson, Anthony Davis. But what do you think?
You know my answer. Come on.
Yeah, it's about as pointless of a question as the will he be National Player of the Year. What are we going to say? No?
No, I mean, look, according to Ken Palm, he should have been the National Player of the Year last year, right? I think there's no reason that he shouldn't be. I know those are lofty expectations, but they are what they are. And then that leaves the kind of the bigger open question is, can we win the national championship? I think we definitely can. I'm really, really curious to see how we match up with these non-conference opponents to start the year, because I think that will kind of set the tone a little bit for the rest of the season. I think that this year will be a lot more normal. Our home games will be a lot more, well, considering who we're playing, probably a lot more lopsided, knock on wood. And I think that this year's team is deeper than last year's team and is going to be able to rebound better than last year's team. And I think those were the two things that really, really hurt us in that national championship game. So if we can get back there and we can do a better job of rebounding the ball on both ends of the floor, and we can do a better job at maybe shooting the ball a little bit, then I think we can do both of those things. And, to your point, we would be, and Drew Timme would be in very, very good company. And I think that would be outstanding. I think it's going to happen. It won't be easy, but I think it will.
Yeah, I mean, never easy to get even to a championship game or a Final Four. We've seen it before. I mean, we've seen it with our own guys who were up for the award, but like I'm looking here now, 2019, Zion Williamson, almost there, Elite Eight, fell short. You have a lot of other guys that have made it to the Final Four, like Frank Kaminsky, Buddy Hield, Frank Mason the third. Trey Burke lost in a championship game, allegedly, because Louisville actually didn't win the national championship that year. But yeah, I mean, I think the question around whether they can break that trend is less around, can Timme win the award while still carrying the team? Because I think if Timme wins the award, that's kind of the expectation right now. And I don't think that that's what we are made, or like that's not the make or break for this team. Whereas if you look at some of these other guys on the teams or who have won National Player of the Year before, it was kind of, they needed to be the best on their game every single game for them to have a legitimate shot at a championship. And while we obviously do need Drew Timme to play well, I think it's going to come down a lot to, how does Chet play game in and game out? How does Nemhard, what's his scoring like this year? Like, how does he take over that role? What do the young guys look like Strother and Salas and Hickman, like Anton Watson? It's going to be the rest of the guys that help us determine if that's possible for us to win a national championship, and more about their consistency. We think we know what we're getting with Drew Timme at this point. I mean, there hasn't really been a disappointment yet. He's had a couple off games here and there, but the team's good enough to where we can survive those. So yeah, I mean, I think it's totally realistic that this could be a year where you look at it and say, yeah, that's a very real possibility. And like I said, looking back at the last few, it's probably one of the better chances. I don't think Garza last year, like Iowa was good. I don't think we ever really thought of them as a legitimate national championship contender. They were a good team. In the Final Four conversation, Obi Toppin at Dayton the 2020 was wide open. So who the hell knows? It could have happened the way they were playing, but not something you would expect. Yeah, I mean, it's totally a possibility. I'm not going to jinx anything.
I'm thinking about some of the guys who could challenge for that. Like, Paolo is going to be an outstanding player. Like, he very well could be National Player of the Year. Kofi Coburn, he's, a consensus preseason first team All-American. He could very well do the exact same thing. I think the bigger question mark is not which players will contend for National Player of the Year. It's which teams are going to be in the running for that national championship. And I mean, going into the tournament last year, it looked like Illinois was just ready to go on a tear. It looked like Ayo Dosunmu was going to have the committee asking themselves big time questions around, should we give this to Luka Garza, or has Ayo Dosunmu played himself into that National Player of the Year spot? And so I don't know. No one really knows how it's going to shake out. and anyone who says that they do, they're lying.
Yeah, I mean, I think last year it was probably a deeper pool in terms of potential winners. I mean, it obviously helps someone like Drew Timme and like last year Luka Garza, where they were a runaway favorite from the beginning of the year. It's their award to lose. Drew Timme's been unanimous in a lot of polls for either, first team All-American, the only unanimous one there, or for Player of the Year. But looking, like you said, Kofi Coburn, I don't really see that happening. But I think he'll be in the conversation for a lot of the year. Like I said, he'll dominate against a lot of teams that don't have somebody to body up against him. Johnny Juzang and Jaime Jaquez from UCLA, either of them could. We know Johnny Juzang kind of has the narrative there from last year. Like if he's playing that way consistently, that's a sexy pick, I would say, because of the style of play. That might be a little more exciting. You mentioned Paolo. This list I'm looking at has Colin Gillespie on the first team All-American. Good player. He's not going to compete for National Player of the Year, I don't think.
No.
Yeah, and then you look at these other guys: Asmus, EJ Liddell, Hunter Dickinson, Trace Jackson Davis, Buddy Boeheim, Chet, Travion Williams, Jaden Ivey, Remy Martin. That's a trio there that I could see one of them, if Purdue or Kansas is really a solid team and becomes like a consensus number 2, number 1 team. Like, yeah, they could very easily be in that conversation, but I think it really is Drew's award to lose this year.
Yeah,
I think he'd have to play very poorly.
Yeah, I think it was Gary Parrish and Matt Norlander were talking about the fact that like National Player of the Year usually just goes to the best player in college basketball, whereas like Coach of the Year, it's really more about expectations and like so it really is just kind of a it's not it is kind of about expectations, but it's not, right? Like Luka Garza averaged like what, I forget, like 30 and 10, something like that, right? Something just outrageous, like stats wise. And in terms of his game, like he was able to stretch out his game all the way beyond the 3-point line. Like, I mean, super impressive. And I think that no one was really going to argue with the fact that if he's on any team in college basketball, he makes that team, instantly a contender. He was the best player in college basketball, arguably. but it had nothing to do with like the expectations. So I don't know. It'll be interesting to see how the season shakes out. Cool.
All right. Well, that wraps up our player questions. We've gone through everyone. So if you've missed any of the other episodes where we've gone over either 2 or 3 other players, go back, take a look, take a listen to those episodes, starting with episode 20, I believe. Maybe it was 21. we got a lot of good questions and conversations going in there if you want to get prepped for the season and the exhibition game. First one is this Sunday, Halloween. We open the season 2 weeks from today. Today's Tuesday that we're recording this, and the Texas game is in 18 days. So we're almost there, getting ready for it. And so we'll be here hopefully weekly, giving you guys more content. And we'll start jumping into our game previews and reviews, as long as keeping up with some of these trends and hopefully some interviews as we go throughout the season. So thank you for listening. If you haven't already, go give us a rating and a review on Apple Podcasts. That helps us grow our podcast. Share with your friends and family if they're looking for any Gonzaga content. Brian, anything else?
Yeah, make sure to check out zagaholic.net. Since our last episode was posted, there have been 2 additional articles on the website, including a really awesome profile on Braden Huff, our most recent commitment. So definitely check that out. And then there's also a piece that's just entitled "What If." Go give it a read. It poses a really interesting scenario about what would have happened if something would have been a little different in the 2018 NCAA tournament for the Zags. Other than that, shout out Cowan Jenkins, editing the podcast. Love your work, man. Keep it up. For all your podcast needs, reach out to Cowan. Other than that, yeah, that's about it. Go Zags.
Go Zags.